We also have to talk about the budget. Fortunately, we have a file photo here of Danielle Smith and her reaction to being told that she is accountable in any way for any of the things that she and her staff does. That might not be what the reaction was, but that's what I'm telling myself because it certainly seems appropriate. To start with the communications strategy that we've seen from the Premier's office in the run-up to the budget. Well, we saw the judges. The judges are just the worst. We're going to spend all of our time lying about the judges. What else did we have going on here? Well, Bruce McAllister, the Premier's director of her Southern office and advocate of corporal punishment, Bruce Spanky McAllister, on just a couple of days before the budget dropped, almost as if he was softening the ground a little bit. He dropped this banger of a tweet where he said the people orchestrating, in regards to immigration into Canada, the people orchestrating this reckless, unsustainable mass immigration into Canada fill me with profound disgust. To deliberately engineer and champion such explosive, unmanageable population growth in your own nation, that's the height of civic responsibility. Was it fueled by greed? Question mark. See how he did it as a question there, so he can't get in any trouble. Did they line their pockets while irrevocably straining our healthcare, education, and social safety nets? Another question mark. Oh, we're just taking so much accountability here. Or does their contempt for Canada's core values and traditions drive them to flood our borders with millions from societies not built on the same foundations that have made us thrive? Oh, look, it's another question mark. Why import from nations with failed systems when our Judeo-Christian heritage and principles have worked so well here? It almost feels like these elites are ashamed of what has built this great country. This is a stark reminder of why Albertans and indeed countless Canadians harbor deep mistrust towards the Laurentian elite in Ottawa. Not the continual turning of the phrase Laurentian elite, I'm sure. They seem all too eager to prioritize their agendas over the well-being of the true North, strong and free. Wow, that's a lot of bigotry in one whole paragraph. It's a good thing he paid for the X subscription, because otherwise he would have had to do that in like 4 or 5 different little tweets and break them all up. But he was able to just type all of that rage and hate out in one place. Lucky him. That's a bigoted tweet. It's a bigoted tweet. There's no question. To say why import from nations with failed systems when our Judeo-Christian heritage and principles have worked so well here? I mean, in context, it's worth remembering that the Judeo-Christian heritage that has worked so well also wrought a genocide on the First Nations people who were here first. So I'm not sure that that's the victory lap to take. I feel like I know it's not. And to boil down the values and the importance of the good old stock Judeo-Christian Canadians, boy, there's something that sounds an awful lot like. I feel like the term I might be looking for might be white nationalism, but I'm not sure if Bruce is a white nationalist. Question mark. I don't know if Bruce is a closeted white supremacist, question mark. I don't know the answers to those questions, period. Danny was asked about that.
Bruce McAllister tweeted this morning also about immigration, saying the people orchestrating this, he's talking about the high levels, the people orchestrating this reckless, unsustainable mass immigration into Canada fill me with profound disgust. To deliberately engineer and champion such explosive, unmanageable population growth in your own nation, question mark, that's the height of civic irresponsibility. Then he went on later to say, does their contempt for Canada's core values and traditions drive them to flood our borders with millions from societies not built on the same foundations that have made us thrive? Why import from nations with failed systems when our Judeo-Christian heritage and principles have worked so well here? I called Mr. McAllister this morning to ask for clarification. he hung up on me, so I'm asking you. My question is, do those views of Mr. McAllister about countries of origin and Judeo-Christian values represent the views of you, the Premier's office, and the United Conservative Party?
Well, I can tell you that Western society is based on the Socratic Judeo-Christian tradition. If you go back and look about why it is we have the society we do, there's no question that there are some foundational influences to that. However, Alberta was also created since 1905 based on the immense diaspora communities that come here. And one of the reasons why Alberta works so well historically is because when people arrive, they have a good paying job, have time to determine whether this is where they want to put down roots and have a family, that is the pace that I think works not only for the newcomer to understand the new society they're moving to, but also to ensure that we've got the supports so that they have access to the healthcare and education and other social supports they need. That system broke in the last 4 years. There's no question about it. And I think that the graph that they were responding to was one that showed, I think it was 6 million people that came to Alberta or came to the country in the post-COVID era. It's not just me saying it's unsustainable, it's the federal government saying it's unsustainable. They've completely changed their international student program, they've completely changed their temporary foreign worker program, and we're working with them to get refocused on economic migrants. So things need to change, there's no question about it. It was the #1 issue that we heard in the Alberta Next panel, is that it was putting too much pressure on our social services, on our job market, on our housing market, on food prices, and so we need to get back to the kind of more rational policy that we had under Stephen Harper, where we had a reasonable amount of newcomers that were able to integrate easily into the society that they chose, especially because they came with a good paying job. That's what we've got to get back to.
Thanks, Kevin. We're going to go to our next question.
Honest,
we have one question and follow up.
The question.
I know, Kevin. We got a few people in line behind you who'd like to get to the next question. Thank you.
Allow me, if you will, to summarize that tweet. Not that tweet, that statement. Could have been a tweet. I don't know. Allow me, if you will, to summarize that statement. Hey, Canada is based on the Socratic Judeo-Christian values. See how we lumped in Socratic and Judeo-Christian as if there wasn't a 500-year difference between those two figures? I don't know. Do with that what you will. Blah, blah, blah. Words, blah, blah, blah. Reporter, but you didn't answer the question. Press secretary, I know, but we're moving on. It's the last 4 seconds that kills me, because they know they're not answering the question. Danielle Smith bent herself into a pretzel for 2 minutes to avoid having to address the plainly bigoted comment that her executive director of her Southern office had made. There's words and other words, and I'll use some smart-sounding words. She did all of that to avoid answering the question. And when the reporter was like, yeah, but you didn't answer the question, the press secretary stepped in and said, I know, and now I'll laugh about it and give it to the next reporter. Even the press secretary knew she wasn't taking responsibility. She was dodging the answer. And he seemed to think it was pretty awesome because he's laughing about it. This is the dignity with which they're comporting themselves. But that was the day after Bruce's tweet. And that brought us to February 19th. Because on February 19th, we got the good news that Danny was going to be doing another... the day before we got the good news. We got the good news that Danny was going to be doing an address to the province. She likes doing these. They're like states of the unions, but they're not. She's going to do an address to the province, and she's going to talk about all of the really great things that she's doing. And one could cynically, perhaps, look at the layout of Bruce's soft pedaling, softening the ground, as is used in comms terms. That he was doing maybe a little bit of foreshadowing, that he was maybe like, hey, it's okay to be bigoted, question mark. That's one possible interpretation. But Danielle Smith, we're in 2 minutes of the speech here. Sorry, everybody, but we got to bring the receipts. So bear with us. Danielle Smith had absolutely no issues laying all of the province's problems almost entirely on, well, the oil prices were low, but also the immigrants are the worst.
To put it bluntly, people across the country and around the world continue to want to move to our province in very large numbers to pursue job opportunities and prosperity. In the past, Canada's responsible immigration policies, such as those under Prime Minister Stephen Harper, constrained international immigration to manageable levels in Alberta so that our province could keep up with the growth of our economy and population. It also ensured that new immigrants primarily arrived here with highly valuable skills, a good job, and started contributing income taxes the moment they arrived. That is the story of the vast majority of our amazing new Canadians who arrived here during that time and are now citizens. These Albertans were and are a huge strength to our economy and provincial culture. And then came Justin Trudeau's disastrous open border immigration policies, which have caused an unprecedented strain on our healthcare, education, and other social programs. In just the last 5 years of Trudeau's tenure, Alberta grew by almost 600,000 people to more than 5 million, all while Ottawa throttled our most important job-creating industries and prioritized immigration away from economic migrants and instead focused on international students, temporary workers, and asylum seekers. Adding 600,000 people in 5 years is like adding half the city of Calgary or Edmonton in 5 years. Although sustainable immigration has always been an important part of our provincial growth model, throwing the doors wide open to anyone and everyone across the globe has flooded our classrooms, emergency rooms, and social support systems with far too many people, far too quickly. As just one example, our student population has skyrocketed by more than 80,000 students in just the last 4 years, and more than 140,000 students now having English as their additional language. Is it any wonder that our teachers and students are struggling so much with classroom complexity and crowding? The changes we need to make to immigration are a significant departure from the status quo, and therefore I am seeking a referendum mandate from Albertans to implement them. On October 19, 2026, we will hold a provincial referendum primarily focused on how Albertans want our government to deal with the issue of immigration, as well as steps we can take as a province to strengthen our constitutional and fiscal position within a united Canada. The fact is, Alberta taxpayers can no longer be asked to continue to subsidize the entire country through equalization and federal transfers, permit the federal government to flood our borders with new arrivals, and then give free access to our most generous in the country social programs to anyone who moves here. This is not only grossly unfair to Alberta taxpayers, but also financially crippling and undercuts the quality of our healthcare, education, and other social services.
Those immigrants are just the cause of all of the problems, I guess, because we're going to have a referendum where we talk about the immigration issues that are so bad. There's 5 questions. There's also the constitutional provincial ones, which includes one of the judge ones, even though we've already established that that's built on a foundation of nothing but hot bullshit. Let's waste some money having a referendum on the judge thing too. They want more control over Alberta immigration. They want benefits for legal residents only. Now again, well, that implies that we're giving out benefits for people who are here illegally. Because it's not just what they say, it's what they don't say. It's how they say what they say that provides all of the subtext, that provides all of the, wait, what? 1 year residency before social supports. So you can be here legally, but you have to wait a year before you get any sort of social supports. I wonder how that works now. User fees for temporary residents and proof of citizenship to vote, which on its face, a lot of people go, well, yeah, that should make sense. But the reality is there's a lot of people who are going to be shut out of the voting process for a lot of different reasons who otherwise would be taken care of through vouching. And we have seen no case whatsoever that there is any kind of voter fraud going on in the province of Alberta. So all of these referendum questions are deeply xenophobic, but they're also not necessarily based on what's the word that I'm looking for. Oh, right, the truth. Let's take a look. Because when we take a look at what's required for eligibility for permanent residence, you have to have come to Canada before you were 19 years old, or you have to have continuously resided in Canada for at least 3 years before you apply. I don't know what that 12 months is about. You have to have continuously resided in Canada since you were 19 years old. If you're now over 19, you have to have been the legal responsibility of a child and family services provider under provincial or territory governments, designated ministry for child protection for at least 1 year, be physically present in Canada when you submit your application and when we grant you permanent residence, not be a person against whom there are serious reasons for considering that you have committed a crime against peace, a war crime, or serious non-political crime outside of Canada. You have been found guilty of acts contrary to the purposes and principles of the United Nations. You have to have a valid passport, travel document, identity document, or statutory declaration and not be inadmissible to Canada. So in order to get to the permanent residency piece, there's some things you got to do. It's not just open door for anybody, but it's the social programs. It's the cost for all of the things that we have to pay for. What about Alberta healthcare? Well, if we take a look at Alberta healthcare, you're eligible for Alberta healthcare if you are legally entitled to be and remain in Canada and make your permanent home in Alberta. You're committed to being physically present in Alberta for at least 183 days in any 12-month period. So that's just, you have to be in Alberta. You can't be in other parts of Canada for longer than you're in Alberta. Not claiming residency or obtaining benefits of a claim of residency in another province, territory, or country. Be any person other than any other person deemed by the regulations to be a resident or temporary resident, not including a tourist, transient, or visitor to Alberta. So, out of the gates here, you don't get Alberta healthcare coverage if you're a tourist, a transient, or a visitor. But I thought that was the people that Danielle Smith was saying cost healthcare so much money, but they're not eligible for that particular social program. That seems so weird. What about this? It says temporary residents are eligible. What happens when we take a look at that? So temporary residents or residents from another country, you have to establish residency in Alberta. So buy or rent a home. You have to intend to live in Alberta for a minimum of 12 consecutive months. You have an acceptable Canada entry document issued by Immigration, Refugees, and Canadian Citizenship or Canadian Border Services Agency. This document must have a minimum 6 months remaining until the expiry date. And then there's the acceptable Canada entry documents. You can have a work permit for an Alberta employer, and the location must be in Alberta. So you have to demonstrate that you have a job in Alberta, a study permit for Alberta, and a letter from an Alberta Education Institute confirming full-time attendance. Visitor record, you must indicate clergy or the holder who is the spouse or a dependent partner or dependent of an eligible resident. Designation as a convention refugee with accompanying documentation with the notice of decision letter. And here's the really important part, because we're talking about the Alberta healthcare coverage up until this point. You will not be denied emergency medical care in Alberta, even if you do not have medical insurance. While emergency services will not be refused, you may be billed for them and are expected to pay later unless you qualify for reimbursement or financial support. So, unless you've got a job, you're approved to be here. If you try to access healthcare, you're paying for it if you don't have private insurance. And in fact, that page says we recommend that you have private insurance. What about education eligibility? As of September 1st of each school year, every child who meets the following criteria is allowed access to education, 6 years or older and younger than 19 years of age. One of the following: a Canadian citizen, has been admitted to Canada for a permanent residence, has a parent who is a Canadian citizen, has a parent who has been admitted to Canada for permanent or temporary residence. So even just looking at that, you have to meet those criteria in order to access the social program that is education. What about old age security? You must be 65 years or older. You must be a Canadian citizen or a legal resident at the time that we approve your OAS secure pension application, and you have to have resided in Canada for at least 10 years since the age of 18. So old age security, you can't get that unless you're a Canadian citizen or a legal resident and have already lived in Canada, contributing for 10 years. What about a CPP? Well, you have to be at least 60 years old. You have to make at least one valid contribution to the CPP. And it's worth noting that your CPP is dependent on your contributions. Fellow contributions can be either from work you did in Canada or from credits received from a spouse, common law partner after a divorce or separation. What about Alberta Seniors Benefit? With all these social programs that all of these people are accessing. You have to be 65 years of older, lived in Canada or lived in Alberta for at least 3 months immediately before applying. Be a Canadian citizen or a permanent resident. Receive the old age security pension from the Government of Canada. Meet financial eligibility criteria. So you can't get access to the Alberta Seniors Benefit unless you're a Canadian citizen or permanent resident. And that permanent resident process, as I outlined at the very beginning of all of this boring lecture with Nate, you can't get. It's not an easy process to become a permanent resident. What about the childcare subsidy? Same thing applies. You have to be working, looking for work, attending school, have special needs. You have to be an Alberta resident. You have to be Canadian citizens or permanent residents of Canada, temporary residents with a valid work permit, refugee claimants, or protected persons claimants. We can do this thing all day long because the childcare is income tested as well. So if you're making big money, you can't get it. What about AISH eligibility? You like to hear the UCP talk about all of the ways that, there's so many people who are coming to the province of Alberta and they're here to take advantage of our generous social programs like AISH. What is AISH eligibility? You have a medical condition that substantially limits your ability to earn a living. I think this is, again, AISH is toast soon. So your medical condition is likely to remain permanent. There's no medical treatment, therapy, rehabilitation, or training available that will help you improve your ability to earn a living. You are at least 18 years old and not eligible to receive an old age security pension. You live in Alberta and are a Canadian citizen or a permanent resident, which means you have to have gone through the permanent resident process. You can't get access to any of these social programs in the way that Danielle Smith and the UCP are talking about. You just can't do it. But that didn't stop Danny from just a couple of days ago throwing this musing out on her taxpayer-funded Alberta update.
Somebody who's here just on a temporary contract, should they really be entitled to all of the same programs, childcare, healthcare, education, social services, and other social supports as somebody who is a citizen or a permanent resident? That's the question that we're going to be putting to Albertans in the fall, because just to put it into context, we had 600,000 people come into our province in the last 5 years. And if you look at the average amount that we pay in program services, it's about $15,600 per capita. We're at the lower end of the range. We're a little bit above Ontario, but we're at the lower end of the range when it comes to other provinces. And we've done some hard work to get it down to that level. But even just doing the math on that, that's about a $9 billion additional cost associated with that many people coming in that quickly. And we haven't seen a concurrent increase in the amount of revenue. And it puts us in the position that we're in.
There's so much bullshit there. Oh my God. I don't even know where to start. In order for that math, just do the math. In order to just do the math. I'm not even at max fired up yet. I'm getting there, but I'm not there yet. Trust me, this is going to get so much spicier in about 10 minutes. In order for that math to work, every single one of those 600,000 people who have come to the province of Alberta would not only have to be eligible for those programs, and I think I just articulated in a great many ways, there's a lot of people who wouldn't be. You want to talk about your students, your international students? They wouldn't be eligible for most of those programs. Sorry. Anybody who's not a permanent resident or a Canadian citizen wouldn't be eligible for most of those programs. So in order for that to be accurate, we would have to assume that those 600,000 people were all Canadian citizens or permanent residents that came to Alberta from Canada. And we would also have to assume that every single one of them, of those 600,000 people who came to Alberta, did not have jobs, did not pay taxes, and were all availing themselves of the social programs, which is, for so many reasons, obviously batshit crazy. There's just no other way to say it. But here's the Premier of Alberta on the program that taxpayers pay for her to be able to stand up and spout this bullshit. I did this math on the back of a napkin and without any context or attachment to reality. Oh, there's my deficit. Oh, look at that. That's all the immigrants. It's gross. And it's dangerous. There's no other way to say it. It's a lie. It's a dangerous lie that emboldens the worst of people. Now, I realize as I say that, I'm standing over here with the same amount of privilege that I have every time I do this show. But that's Danny trying to justify her way around her mismanagement of the financial situation in the province of Alberta by saying it's the immigrants' fault. 600,000 new people. Well, there's no way that we could have kept up to it with record royalties up until the last year. There's no way that we could have possibly seen this coming using basic modeling of population growth and aging. There's no way that we could have seen the demand for all of these services. It's not like healthcare and education have been clamoring for a need for more resources for literally fucking decades. There's no way we could have known. It's the immigrants. One of the things that I was asked in the run up to this show is, I was like, I don't want to talk about the budget. There's big ideas that we need to talk about here. I don't want to talk about the budget. And as we're broadcasting this, it's looking very much like the tragic destabilization of the Middle East is going to cause a significant bump in oil prices. And there's going to be a whole lot of people who go, hooray, our budget is better because people are dying. And I don't know that that's the win. So who knows what the financial futures for the province of Alberta are going to look like. One thing is abundantly clear to anybody who is a lesson of who's a student of history, is that when you go into other countries and you try to destabilize them and do regime change externally, it always makes things worse. It has to come internally. And there's ways to support that and all of that nonsense that I'm not going to get into tonight. But I'm not looking at what's happening. I'm looking at the lessons of Iraq. I'm looking at the lessons of Afghanistan. And I'm going, I'm not sure this is the good thing that everybody thinks it's going to be, because there's always consequences to this sort of action, and a lot of people end up dying. But assuming that oil prices don't skyrocket, I think they already have. I haven't really looked, but assuming that oil prices don't skyrocket, I was told that people are going to want to hear my thoughts on the budget. I don't know why. I'm not an economist, but that's what I was told. So I spent the last couple of days trying to figure out how to articulate my thoughts on the budget before we get to the next piece. And it's really simple. What Danny has done with all of the areas of responsibility in government is she's taken her car to the mechanic. And she said, I don't like this car. I don't like it. So what I would like you to do is take it apart and rebuild it using only the same parts. I expect different results when you're done. You may not use any new parts. And I'm going to redirect some of the money to my friends who maybe are going to make some money. So there might be not quite as much money to make the car work, but that's what I would like you to do. And now it's a shock that with the disintegration of healthcare and the rebuilding and duplication that's been required to get services back to where they were before Danny went in like a bull in a china shop, things cost more now because we broke everything. That's my there's my erudite budget analysis. But getting back to the horror show, Danny's comments about immigrants didn't go unnoticed. there were a lot of people who said, whoa, 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 hold on. That's really unacceptable. And one of them was Deputy Leader of the NDP, Rocky Pancholi.
What is she inflaming here? Hatred, racism? What is that too extreme a speculation?
Like, I think I'm a public figure who has been in this role for about 7 years now, and I can tell you that the level of racism and hate that has been expressed has risen undoubtedly in this province, and it is aligned with this government and this premier's attempt to pin all of her failings on newcomers to this province. And we know that it's not just newcomers to this province who are experiencing this. We heard a story of a man in Calgary who 16-year-old daughter was working at a drive-through, and somebody came through the drive-through and said to her, "You're stealing our jobs, go back where you came from." This young girl was born in Calgary. She is a Calgarian. She is an Albertan just as much as the person who just moved here last week. There is no doubt in my mind that underlying all of this is an attempt to be divisive, to pit people against each other, and it is emboldening some very dark and disturbing behavior. And the Premier can try to pretend with her wordy questions that that's not what this is about, but she hasn't provided any facts to support that there is a big financial income or hit coming from allegedly paying support services to people who, in her view, don't have entitlement to them. She hasn't delivered on any of that. All she's delivered on is the innuendo and suggestion that people who are new here are somehow taking things away from people who lived here before. And that is designed to single out people and direct and encourage racism. We know that. We don't need to be, it's not coded language. Anybody who's a person of color has experienced some of this in the last few months, in the last year. They know what's happening here, and it's very clear what it is. And the Premier wouldn't even distance herself from some very despicable comments from her, executive director, or deputy chief of staff. I can't remember what his title is anymore. But she won't distance herself from that language. And again, true leadership is not taking a situation and making it worse and making it hotter and inflaming people and making them more angry. True leadership is actually coming together and saying, bringing down the temperature, being calm, being responsible, being thoughtful. That's what people should expect from their Premier. That is what I expect. And I know that if we had the opportunity to be government, that's the kind of leadership that we would deliver.
So Rocky didn't really pull any punches there. She made her feelings very well known. And she talked a lot about the dangers of using this kind of language. And Smith responded. Now, I got to be clear before we run this clip. The date on the bottom of the clip is wrong. The clip is from February 20th. It's just our editor got into the silly sauce a little bit early, apparently. And so the clip that you're about to hear is, I assure you, from February 20th, 2026.
This morning, the Deputy Opposition Leader called this approach on immigration and the referendum an attempt to be divisive, to pit people against each other, and it's emboldening some dark and disturbing behavior. Could you comment on that?
Well, I'm accustomed to seeing the NDP try to scare people. They do that all the time. They make hysterical claims that are not true, and they're the ones who I think feed polarization and division.
Oh, the NDP, they're the worst. They're almost as bad as the immigrants. They are hysterical, division. They're just the enemy. They are the NDP with their hysterical division. She did not like Rocky Pancholi's comments one bit, but Rocky wasn't the only person who shared some comments. And it's also important to realize that Rocky's comments about the rise in hate are not without merit. This is a Facebook post that was just from a couple weeks ago, where a group of people who were dressed all in black, wearing white masks, who were later identified as a white supremacist group, stuck themselves between Calgary and Edmonton. Their slogan with a slogan, "Remigration Now," suggesting sending all immigrants back to their countries of origin. So this is real. This is Alberta. This is it should be easy for anybody to say, wow, something dangerous is happening here. We should maybe pay attention to it. And some people did. Former Premier of Alberta and former leader of the NDP, Rachel Notley, put up a Facebook post that started with a riff on a poem and we're going to talk about it in a minute here, but the riff on the poem is, first they came for the trans people, then they came for the unionized workers, next it was the judges, now it's immigrants. If you think that you or someone you love won't be next, you're sorely mistaken. To be clear, that is riffing on a poem by a pastor named Martin Niemöller, who was a Nazi. He realized after the error of his ways, and he penned the poem that's called First They Came. It's one that you've probably all heard, but just in case. First they came for the communists, and I did not speak out because I was not a communist. Then they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak out for me. It's a very powerful poem. And it's a cautionary tale that has so many lessons in it. It just does. For me, that poem is about the choice of apathy, the choice to choose apathy, to look away. Not only does it cause harm to everybody that you're looking away from, but it ultimately guarantees your own end. Because as a society, we are only functional when we stick up for each other, when we speak out for each other, when we try to raise the bar for everybody. That's what that poem is about. And the fact that it is written by a former Nazi should give everybody pause to consider the weight of the words and the meaning behind the words. And the fact that this poem is tragically relevant to the state of Alberta politics is something that everybody should be paying attention to, because the UCP has come for trans people. They did use the notwithstanding clause to take away the rights of trans people. They did use the notwithstanding clause to take away the rights of unionized workers, hundreds of thousands of teachers. Now they're coming for the judges. Now they're coming for the immigrants. Thomas Lukasik, who we've had on the show and who speaks quite candidly about his experiences with authoritarianism, tweeted out on the same day, immigrants are not Alberta's problem, they're here legally. They're the ones serving you coffee at Timmy's. Populist governments need a scapegoat, an out group. For Hitler, it was the Jews. For Trump, it's Latinos. It's an un-Canadian and deplorable political strategy. Now, after Danielle Smith responded, he followed up with a second tweet. No, fascism didn't start with concentration camps in 1939. It started with xenophobic government policies in 1932. Too few spoke out then. Scapegoating problems on vulnerable minorities is disgusting. And we're going to play now the clip where Smith responded to the question. And I want you to really listen to the front end of the question because it is critically important.
Today, Rachel Notley and Thomas Lukasik have thrown out accusations of Nazi tactics when referring to this immigration approach. Could you comment on that as well, please?
That's gross. It's just disgusting. Any mention to, if you're going to call somebody a Nazi, you better be referring to the Holocaust and the devastation that caused to the Jewish people. That is disgusting language, and it should never be used. If they want to have a serious conversation about immigration levels, let's have it. That's what a referendum is all about. And quite frankly, as I've mentioned, This is the same kind of policy that was affirmed last week by the federal government when it came to saying that temporary foreign workers should have private insurance when they arrive. It's the same policy that already exists in Ontario. And we are asking Albertans if they want to have a system that puts Albertans, citizens as well as permanent residents first when it comes to taxpayer-funded programs, and then have reasonable premiums and the ability of those who are temporary to access the programs with their own resources. But that kind of language has no place in this debate.
It's gross. She's not wrong. She wants to have a serious conversation. Okay. We've obtained some comms strategies that I'd like to share with you now, because they are, unfortunately, to me, and it's up to every person to make their own judgment, a little insightful in regards to what the province of Alberta is doing with their communications and the way they're handling their communications around the budget. It's two different sets of comms rules that we've obtained. I'd like to share them with you now. The first set of rules: avoid abstract ideas, appeal to emotions. Constantly repeat just a few ideas. Use stereotyped phrases. Give only one side of the argument. Continuously criticize your opponents. Pick out one special enemy for special vilification. Second one's a bit longer. Communicators must have access to information concerning events and public opinion, so they want access to polling. To be perceived, messaging must evoke interest, the interest of the audience, and must be transmitted through an attention-getting medium. Credibility alone, so not the truth, but credibility alone must determine whether the message output should be true or false. Messaging must be carefully timed. Messaging must label events and people with distinctive phrases or slogans. Messaging to voters must create an optimum anxiety level. Messaging must facilitate the displacement of aggression by specifying the targets for hatred. Messaging cannot immediately affect strong counter tendencies. Instead, it must offer some form of action or diversion or both. Like a referendum. If you think the UCP is utilizing any of those comm strategies, if you think any of them apply, then you're fucking right. It's time for a serious conversation. Because the first set of comm strategies is straight from Adolf Hitler, and the second set is from his propagandist, Joseph Goebbels. I am so done. I am so done with this notion that for whatever reason, the Holocaust belongs only to a certain set of people and should only be talked about within a very narrow set of confines. I'm done with it. I have no more time for it. If you pick up the tools of a Nazi, that does not make you a Nazi, but it makes you somebody who is choosing to pick up and use the tools that survivors of the Holocaust have identified as being the things that ultimately led to it. And that is a choice. That is a choice that every person who picks up those tools should be responsible for. If you're doing things that were done not just by Nazis, if you're doing those things and your response to somebody saying, because again, if you remember, I said, listen to the beginning of the question. Thomas Lukasik and Rachel Notley did not accuse Danielle Smith of being a Nazi. And to be perfectly clear for the record, I'm not accusing Danielle Smith of being a Nazi, but Thomas Lukasik and Rachel Notley, and I'm happy to add my name to the list, are raising the concerns that Danielle Smith is choosing to use the same tools that Nazis used. And Danielle Smith's response is to say, whoa, 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 we should never talk about Nazi tactics or the Holocaust in any context other than this very, very narrow set of confines that seems to be very convenient for me. And I'm sorry, but I'm not going to be fucking lectured on history by a woman who seems to only embrace history when it is expedient for her. I'm not. This is a premier who has, when it is adventitious, said, oh yeah, I'm Métis. This is a premier who has, when it is of value, said, did I say Métis? I meant Cherokee. Her relationship with the history is so fraught that she does not, in my opinion, get to lecture anyone on when we get to talk about things that historically have a very real precedent. I'm not going to listen to anyone who says we shouldn't be talking about these things. I'm not going to listen to anyone who says we shouldn't be expressing concern that Danielle Smith is using many of the same tactics that were used by the Nazis, because instead I choose to listen to these people.
We are all human beings, all created by the same creation, and there's no reason to hate somebody because they are different. We are all equal. So, and that is why most of the survivors have written books and give talks and tell the people, if you're prejudiced against somebody else, what can happen. And it can happen to anybody. This is what the Holocaust survivors' message is. Don't get prejudiced, help each other, be a good human being. That is the purpose of why you are alive.
I thought Britain was different. I was taken with thousands of other prisoners to the railway station with a view to being put on a train to Auschwitz. The road to the station bordered a big forest. As we were walking along this road, I was forced marched with thousands of other prisoners. Much to my amazement, I suddenly found my aunt dashing out of the forest, grabbing me, running back to the forest with me. The whole incident must have taken 1 or 2 minutes. We have to stand up against prejudice and hatred. We've seen now where that leads to. Extreme hatred leads eventually to the gas chambers of Auschwitz.
Holocaust survivor Eva Sepisi has a warning for the world. Don't let history repeat itself. Asked about how she views rising anti-Semitism and right-wing populism, she said,
Es ist erschreckend, auf jeden Fall.
It is terrifying. It is definitely terrifying that it is like this, and that is why we have to do something about it in the very beginning.
Was tun am Anfang.
Because the Shoah did not begin with Auschwitz, but with words, silence, and society looking away. And every single person should do something to ensure that something like this never happens again.
The 92-year-old survived Auschwitz, the Nazi death camp liberated 80 years ago by Soviet troops. She's among a group of survivors voicing concerns about the current political climate. 96-year-old Teresa Regula was also brought to Auschwitz. It's difficult to make out the numbers the Nazis tattooed on Regula's arm, but they're fresh in her mind. 22-0-11, she said. Speaking at her home in Krakow, Poland, she says terrible things are happening in the world. People didn't draw any conclusions, she said, adding she chose not to have children so they wouldn't have to go through anything like what she suffered. Janina Iwanska, a Polish Catholic woman sent to Auschwitz at almost the same time as Regula in 1944, also remained childless. She's worried about the generations of children to come.
What will their future be like? Because I see it as bleak, because I remember before 1939, hatred was created between people, pitting some people against others, treating others as a slightly lower, worse race. And what came of it? But what is now is still on a much, much larger scale.
Oscar Knobloch is a Holocaust survivor. The 97-year-old has devoted his life to educating people, young and old, about what happened, so it never happens again.
The Holocaust didn't start with bullets or the gas chamber. Unfortunately, it started with words, with lies that created hate, and hate is the creator of a Holocaust.
It's not just a Jewish thing, the Holocaust. Anybody could be a victim of something like this, regardless of their race, their religion, their gender, anything, their culture. And the thing that you have to understand is something like the Holocaust, a genocide, a mass murder of innocent people, can happen anywhere.
Just a little bit communicate.
Part of the Holocaust exhibit includes a virtual reality experience where anyone can ask Knobloch about his life and what he went through. The Holocaust survivor also discusses concerns he has today with hate crimes on the rise and an increase in lies and propaganda across the country. His mission is to get people to speak up when they see anyone being bullied or harassed.
Because if we do nothing, if we let it grow, anti-Semitism and hatred will grow where we will not be able to control it anymore. That's how it happened with the Nazis.
So that's who I'm going to take my history lessons. That's who I'm going to take my history lessons from. And I'm not going to let anybody tell me or anybody that I'm near that we're not allowed to say and honor the wishes of those people. We can't talk about when people start using the same tools as the Nazis did. I'm not going to hear it. I'm not going to do it. And it crushes me that we have failed to learn those lessons. Those who fail to learn from history are bound to repeat it. We have a premier of Alberta that is happily picking up all of the weapons that the Nazis used that started that fire. And she's trying to say that we can't talk about it. Danielle Smith has started book bans. She's going to be expanding them. Danielle Smith has targeted vulnerable populations. She's gone after the low-hanging fruit of humanity. She's done so using arguments that aren't supported by science or medicine or data. She's taken away people's rights. She's union busted using the notwithstanding clause to take away their charter rights. That's where we are. I'm not saying that Danielle Smith is a Nazi. I'm not saying that. And anybody who wants to accuse me of it, whatever, go fuck yourself. Because I'm not saying that. What I am saying is that she's playing with the same tools that the people in that clip said, don't ever let anyone play with these again. And I'll listen to them. I'll just listen to them. If you pick up the tools of a Nazi, it doesn't make you a Nazi. But it does mean you're choosing to use the tools that survivors of the Holocaust identified as leading to the Holocaust. The people in that video clip were not saying, only speak about the Holocaust within this narrow confine. They were saying, my God, please learn from this and don't ever let it happen again. They were very clear, and there's no shortage. There's all kinds of online resources that you can go to hear the survivors of the thing say, learn from this. Don't let this happen to anyone, anywhere, ever again. And it is, I do not have the words to articulate the shock and horror that I have for the fact that the Premier of Alberta and the people who stand behind her and beside her seem to have failed to learn that most basic lesson.